Welcome to Book Club Preview. Today we're looking at The Body in the Library, chapter 15 and 16, and things are so close to being able to figure out who the murderer is. Well, chapter 15 starts out with Mrs. Marple going to the vicar's house and talking to the vicar's wife. I can't remember her name. She's playing with her baby. Miss Marple asks her, are there any charities that you guys need help with to get more money from? She says, oh yes, we have many, many, many different charities. Mrs. Marple picks the sale of work. So Miss Marple is going to take this book, okay, and write down people's names and how much they gave. And she's going to go around to the village to different people's houses and ask them to give money, okay? But, well, that's what a normal person would do. Miss Marple has a second motive. She's going to use this, oh, I'm coming to talk about the sale of work for the church to get money, but she's also going to be investigating. And the vicar's wife knows Miss Marple is up to something, but Miss Marple doesn't share. But she says, okay, here's the book, here's the information, good luck. And Miss Marple heads off. She goes to Miss I think it's Dina Lee's house, who actually is Mr. Basil's cottage. And as Miss Marple's there, she's asking Miss Dina about different questions about the home. She notices that the rug near the fire, because when the fire pops sometimes the little sparks come out and they can start a fire. But this special rug is there because they would land on that rug and it wouldn't cause a fire. It's a hearth rug. But theirs was gone. And she's like, oh, that's interesting. And as Mrs. Marple starts asking questions, Miss Dina gets angry and she's like, you, Snoop, you're looking for a scandal. And she's yelling at Miss Marple, and Miss Marple's just polite and gentle. And she says, well, you know, one thing she asks is your name really Miss Dina Lee? And we find out that Dina's actually been married to Mr. Blake for a long time. So I think it's Basil. So she's actually Mrs. Dana Basil, but they've been keeping it a secret to kind of play a joke on the town. But then Miss Marple says, you better start using your real name because your husband's going to be arrested for the murder of Ruby. And she's like, what? No, my goodness, no way. And right at this time, Basil comes in. Basil Blake? Oh, yeah, so Mr. Blake. Okay, so she's Mrs. Dana Blake. Okay, that's her last name. Do I have it here on my list? So Basil comes in and he's like, oh my goodness, honey. He lays down and Miss Marple starts asking him questions and he says, oh, it's true, she knows it all. And we get the whole story. Basil and his wife had a fight. He took off and he went to their cottage that they're in right now. And when he got there, he opened up, it was very dark. He saw a dead body of Ruby there. And he just saw this dead body. He was drunk. He didn't know what to do. He decided that he's going to play a joke on Mr. Bantry. And he's going to take this girl and put her in Mr. Bantry's library. Because he always thought Mr. Bantry was kind of snobby. And so he's kind of playing a prank. But he's drunk, so he's not really thinking this through. And then when he woke up in the morning, he realized what he'd done. And then the police came over and he was so nervous that he couldn't tell the truth because the policeman was so snobbish too that he just acted really arrogant to get the guy to go away. So the lady was actually originally found in Basil's room, but he claims he didn't do it. And Mrs. Marple says, I know you didn't do it, but everyone's going to think you did it. Well, the police come and they take Basil. And chapter 16, it starts with Mrs. Bantry coming home. And she comes home and she says, honey, I'm home. And Mr. Bantry says, honey, it's great to see you. They hug. and they give a kiss, and it looks like everything is normal. But Mrs. Bantry's been married to Mr. Bantry for a while, and she knows something's wrong. She says, "Honey, what's wrong?" And he says, "Oh, nothing's wrong." And she's like, "Well, what have you been doing?" So there's been a few days. "Well, I was supposed to have lunch with these people, but they canceled. I was supposed to go to this meeting and be like the leader, but they asked me to not be the leader anymore. These people were supposed to have dinner with me too, but I said I'm not really feeling up for it, so I canceled on them, and maybe there's something else, I don't know." So everyone, just like Mrs. Marple and Mrs. Bantry thought, are kind of snubbing or pushing away Mr. Bantry because they think he actually killed her. But Mrs. Bantry says, "Where are we going to have dinner?" And he says, "I don't know." She says, "We're going to eat dinner in the library." And Mr. Bantry's like, I don't know if that's a good idea, honey." He's like, "No, we're going to the library." And when she says this, something brightens in his eyes. And he's like, yes, let's go to the library." Now, I'm not sure what's going on there. Maybe he feels that his wife has confidence in him and courage, and so they're going to meet this together. But some life comes back into Mr. Bantry. The next part, Mrs. Bantry is calling everywhere for Mrs. Marple, trying to figure out where she is, trying to get a hold of her, trying to find her. Well, it ends up Mrs. Marple has been coming to Mrs. Bantry's house. And so Miss Bantry gets there, she says, "What's going on?" And she's like, "I figured I have to tell you first. Blake Basil, or Basil Blake, has been arrested for the murder of Ruby." And Mr. Bantry says, "I knew it was him. That's that terrible guy, blah, 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 blah." And Miss Bantry says, "No, he's not the murderer. The body was found in his house, but he brought it into your house." And again, Mr. Bantry says, "If the body was found in his house, then he must have been the murderer." And he said, "That just goes together." It's like, well, it doesn't always go together. I've looked into Mr. Blake, and he's actually a really nice guy. When he was young, he rescued some people from a burning house. He got hurt during the time, and he was hurt for a year. And then Mr. Bantry says, "Oh, I guess he's a better guy than I thought." And his kind of opinion changes. And he said, and Mrs. Marple says, "He was drunk when he found the body, and he thought it would be kind of a joke to put the body in your library." Now, for some reason, English people say, "Hey, if you're drunk, we can forgive you." So Mr. Bantry says, "Oh, well, I guess he's drunk. You can't judge a man by what he does when he's drunk. In fact, I remember one time, well, I'm not going to tell you about that time, but what are we going to do here?" And Miss Marple says, "I know who the murderer is, but I need help catching him. I need you to come with me to Somerset House." And that is where chapter 16 ends. I don't want it to end. I want to read 17 and 18, but we have to stop there. That leaves us with some vocabulary. Offspring. Offspring are your children. If you think about a plant, something that comes off the plant's offspring are its other plants. We call those children. The vicar's wife is looking at her son. Neglect means to not care for or to abandon. So one baby book is saying, don't play with your child very much, but let your child just go and do its own thing. And so the vicar's wife is looking at her son, trying not to interfere, trying to neglect her son, but she keeps playing with him. Gentility is like warmth. So when Mrs. Marple goes into Dina Lee's home, which is actually Mr. Blake's home, she's just saying all this really sweet, gentle stuff, even though the lady gets more angry and rude. Impertinent is rude. And Mrs. Marple says, "You're going to think me rude to say this." And Miss Dina says, "It will be rude, so don't say it." She's like, "Yes, but I still have to say it. Your husband's going to be arrested for murder." Impertinent, rude, impolite. Deprecatingly is disapprovingly. Has a deprecating smile, a disapproving smile. To and fro This is kind of like rocking back and forth, back and forth. So Mr. Blake is rocking to and fro. Effeminate is like a girl. Feminine, effeminate, like feminine, like woman, like a girl. And maybe some of the other townspeople think that Basil Blake is effeminate. He's a little bit too much like a girl. But we learn that's because he got hurt, and that's why he didn't maybe go to the war and things like that. Impeccable is perfect. We have the word impeach. Impeach is when a president gets into trouble by the law, and you can't take a president's responsibility away easily. You have to impeach them. It's like when a lot of people in the country or the government say, we don't trust you, we want you to come down, and there's this really big thing. So impeccable though means it's not there's nothing wrong with it. So you can't find any problems. Perfect. Oh, one more. Derisively is mockingly, and I think this is Mr. Bantry. He says something to Miss Marple saying, "Oh, of course, when you find a body in someone's room, they are the murderer." Okay, even though people found the body in his room, but he wasn't the murderer. But he thought this about Basil Blake. That leaves us with our discussion question. When Mr. Bantry finds out that Mr. Basil or Mr. Blake was drunk, he's like, okay, I can understand that. You can't judge a man when he's drunk. But I mean, if you were Mr. Bantry, okay, and somebody finds a dead body in their house, they take that dead body and put it to your house, so the police think you're the killer, so the whole village thinks you're the killer, but you find out that person was drunk. Would you forgive that person? Would you forgive Mr. Basil or Mr. Blake? Or would you still be angry or upset? I'm pretty shocked. He flips pretty quickly. I was like, wow. How would you handle that? And of course, please make your own discussion question. That is all the time that we have for today. But thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Book Club Preview. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.